Councilmember Leyva,
Here.
Councilmember Greer,
Here.
Councilmember Dickinson,
Here.
Councilmember Hepperly,
Here.
Councilmember Schumacher,
Present.
Vice Mayor Hunt,
Here.
Mayor Pelguda,
Present.
have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We're going to kind of just mix it up a little bit, and we're going to put APS first. So, APS Fire Mitigation Presentation. Sir, welcome. And you're only going first because we love Darla, just so you know.
Everybody loves Darla.
So, just know that.
So thank you, Mayor and members of the council. My name's Robbie Hool. I'm the supervisor for the Northwest Division up here in the Prescott and the Quad Cities. And, you know, we're just finishing May, which is a fire preparedness, right, for our season. And we just want to go over briefly, as we have in the past, what APS is doing. Reliability and safety are our top concerns. When we get into safety, it's for the community, the first responders, my responders, and our environment. We're very aware of what goes on in those processes. And when we get into these, so far this year, as of today, there's already been 311 fires in and around our structures. Last year, we finished with a little over 1,200, so it's already starting off to be a pretty busy season, and we're not even in that season yet. When we do it, we have a pretty comprehensive fire mitigation plan. We base them off of prevention, mitigation, and the response, how we perform those. Prevention, so as of now, we've actually inspected over 24,000 poles, structures, and when we do those inspections, we look for anything that has a potential to cause a situation. We also look for vegetation around those poles. We have teams that actually clear that 10 feet around. We've had multiple fires, one being the Goodwin, where very successful in those areas where those poles were able to stay standing. We didn't have to do anything. In fact, that fire, we only lost 6 poles through that whole event, which is pretty remarkable for the size. With that, in our line inspections, we actually utilize every tool we can, between helicopter, drones, side-by-sides, and foot. Well, just in our area, Northwest, we have over 1,900 miles of overhead wire, so quite a lengthy process. It usually goes on for 5 to 6 months as we go through it, and we just buttoned that up 2 days ago. So we're feeling pretty confident in the system. In mitigation, those are challenges when we look at what takes place. So if we're sitting at home and your lights go off and come back on, you do that a couple times. That's a reclose strategy that our system does. When we get into fire mitigation, we align with the Forest Service, we align with different fire entities. And as those elevations rise, we have to go into what's called a no-shot mode, which you don't get that go off. What you get is no power. And the reason for that is probably 80% of what takes place is foreign interference. It could be a car that just really likes our pole and says, I'm going to take that out, or a transformer, something like that. When that happens, we actually have to patrol the system to make sure there's no shock load down that structure with the wire. So that requires the resources to get out in the field. We do have a feeder that comes into Prescott Valley that's 87 miles long. So we do have tools in between sections where we can narrow that down and bring it back up. But what we experience is you're going to have longer power outages when we get into that. And, you know, we're very proactive environment. We don't want something to come down that's going to start a situation in the areas that we live, right? So also there are events where we have to de-energize due to the fire personnel out in the field or law enforcement. So as we come in, right now we're in a status called P2. When we go to P3, which is probably inevitably short time before we get there, we will see that within our areas. And we can't always say it's mountainous area or tree stuff, because the Viewpoint fire was a chain dragging on the road that just took off. So we do have a lot of vegetation in the area that we're aware of. And the response for me and the teams I have, I actually stagger them out. So they usually work 15-hour days when this stuff takes place, and I have them staged to where we just go through the night on restoring the power and doing all the inspections of the line. So We just wanted to give you guys a little update where we are and the proactive stance to it. And if there's any questions, I'll definitely answer those.
Vice Mayor?
I have to say Robbie Hool is pretty awesome too, because I sit on the chamber board with him, so.
Yes, you do.
Anything else? Sir, we appreciate you, and I understand we have someone that took Mackenzie's place representing Northern Arizona as well, starting soon.
He's here, Frank Sanderson.
Excellent. Look forward to meeting him.
Yep, we'll get him in here.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Moving on to item 2A, Report 2023 Attainable Housing Task Force. Mr. Ruby, are you leading us off?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council. I just wanted to introduce Mr. Cal Nye, who's the chairman of the Attainable Housing Task Force. They presented to Planning Commission on May the 8th, did a wonderful job with a wonderful report. And I would just, although he needs no introduction, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Nye and the rest of the group if he's so inclined. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Mayor, council members, we with the Attainable Housing Task Force are happy to be here. We appreciate having a chance to share with you the results of our work. And thanks for this time that we can present to you some of our findings and recommendations. We are hopeful that you will leave this meeting with an increased awareness of the seriousness of the attainable housing shortage in Prescott Valley and a sense of urgency for implementing our proposed strategy as soon as possible. As a point of clarification, we're using the term attainable housing versus affordable housing. This definition holds that a housing is attainable when it consumes no more than 30% of a household's gross pre-tax income. Council members, as you are likely aware, our beloved town of Prescott Valley has a serious and growing housing cost problem. Median and below median income individuals and families can no longer afford to live here. As a result, many important job positions are left unfilled. Job applicants often do not accept offers because they are unable to find housing here that they can afford. And some workers who have been living here are leaving because their rent is now too high. As you can see from this slide, Prescott Valley has many unfilled jobs. Also, local contractors and other businesses are unable to hire and retain the needed employees. Of course, the fact that these organizations have open positions is nothing new. What is significant here is the extremely high number of open positions. Latest figures for Prescott Valley show that 51% of renters are cost burdened. The term cost burdened is commonly defined as spending more than 30% of income for rent and utilities. The national recommended standard is that households not pay more than 30% of incomes for housing. To clarify a little with this slide, if you look down that left column, the 35,000 to 49,000 is highlighted, and if you take that across to the right column, you see 35%. What that tells us is that of the households in that income category, 35% of them are paying more than 30% for their housing. Fortunately, and to your credit, Prescott Valley town leadership is astutely aware of this attainable housing shortage. You are also aware that the reasons for the shortage are many and varied, that there is no simple one-size-fits-all solution, and that this attainable housing shortage is a community-wide problem in that it affects many individuals, families, and organizations within our town. These factors in mind, the mayor created our Attainable Housing Task Force. It was created to take an in-depth look at the housing market and needs within the town and across the region, and advise the mayor and council on the policy and programs consistent with the general plan goal and objectives. Vice Mayor Hunt is an advisor to our task force, and I might add, has been a delight to work with. Shown here are our task force members. This has been a very enjoyable group of people to become acquainted with and to work with. And we are hopeful that you will find our work and resulting recommendations to be both reasonable and attainable. Our first task force meeting was on October 7th of last year, 2022. Over the past 6 months, we have met 11 times in 2-hour-long meetings at the Civic Center. It is noted that our task force members spent many, and I emphasize many, additional hours doing between meetings research to learn about possible ways that towns can create more attainable housing. Our work process started with defining our goal, which is to make recommendations to the Prescott Valley Town Council for ways to increase the supply of attainable housing. One meeting was spent on completion of a SWOT analysis. SWOT is an acronym for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The results of this analysis can be found on pages 12 and 13 of the report. As you can see on these two slides, several items were identified in each SWOT category. Our research revealed many ways in which town governments can encourage and facilitate the creation of attainable housing. A survey of local area contractors gave us useful information. Their experience and opinions about barriers to the construction of attainable housing was very helpful. We have incorporated these important builder-developer perspectives into our recommendations. Our task force report recommends 36 strategy actions that the town of Prescott Valley can do to increase the availability of attainable housing. These actions are organized into 4 impact areas. In the interest of brevity, I will not here speak to each of these impact areas, as you all have the report and can study it at your convenience. I will, however, call attention to the first recommendation, which our task force members agreed is essential to the successful creation of sufficient attainable housing in Prescott Valley. And that is to create a new housing facilitator position with a detailed job description and the responsibility and authority to lead the implementation of the task force report's 36-item attainable housing strategy. In summary, we task force members commend you for addressing this growing Prescott Valley housing need. And I think I can speak for all of our members when I say that it has been our pleasure to offer our assistance to this important housing initiative. After much discussion regarding how to format and what to include in the report, we believe that you will find our recommendations to be both understandable and doable. So, council members, to coin a popular phrase, the attainable housing ball is now in your court. We are hopeful that you will enthusiastically run with it. Thank you again for allowing us time to share this attainable housing summary with you. I'd like just briefly to recognize our task force members who are present. Dave Smith, you want to wave your hand? Michael Carson. Who else do we have? Sandy Griffiths, Edie Harless, Allison Lineker. Okay, thanks all for being here. That concludes my presentation. So we will now take your questions or comments.
Sir, I just want to start off by thanking you and all the members of the group. You guys took your own time out of your day to recognize something that was important to the town of Prescott Valley and just trying to make it better. So we appreciate each of you for just stepping up and being good citizens. So thank you for that. I believe Vice Mayor is going to lead off with some additional comments.
Cal, thank you so much. I don't have any questions for you, but I just want to express my appreciation to the whole group. But I do have some comments and questions just in general. So thank you for your presence.
Okay, sure thing.
Does
pleasure.
anybody else have questions for Cal? No. Cal, you did a great job.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
So first of all, I went to the mayor last year because I was concerned that now 3 years our legislature was talking about taking away local land use. And being a planner by education and career, it really scared me because I know how interested our residents are in commenting on projects, and I think it's their right to be able to do that, to be able to come to the dais and tell us what they think about projects being proposed. And our legislature now for 3 years has been talking about taking away that right and making projects by right. So just exempting any kind of review by planning and zoning and the town council. So I went to the mayor and asked him to, I'm glad you're there, Frank, because I might need your help on this. I went to the mayor after reviewing some documents, and the legislature set up a committee to, in lieu of approving a law last year, a review committee that toured the state, taking comments, asking for cities and towns, jurisdictions, and nonprofits to make comments on affordable housing. And I attended this Sedona meeting and made our comments of what we were looking at in Prescott Valley and our need. And I came back and asked the mayor to set up an attainable housing committee. Because again, the state, rather than our League of Cities really worked with the state rather than to approve a by right zoning. They set up this committee that for 2 years would study it. And the committee took quick comments. Well, this year that kind of all changed. And I don't know if you guys see him, but our zoning attorney that's working on to amend our zoning is on, Frank Cassidy, and I'm going to ask for his help if I screw anything up. But there's a bill that is going through the legislature now, and I've been on Monday morning calls, and Brenda has too, and they're still talking about, and let me just say, I mean no disrespect to our 3 local electeds here, because they have been, and I've been talking to them as frequent as today. I talked to legislator Nguyen about this, and they have been very sensitive and passionate to our requests. But it's not so much them; it's others down in the legislature, and they're talking about design review preemption, which means there would be no design review of multiple family projects coming in. And they're talking about take away discretionary review, which means there would be no review by electeds, P&Z, and no comments by residents. So when multiple family projects come in, there would be no review. And that there would be no minimum parking standards, and that there would be no lot size greater than 4,000. This is what the legislature has been talking about this whole legislative season to try to tackle attainable housing. And that's what scared me to death, and that's why I asked the mayor to form this Attainable Housing Committee. And so that's why we spent 8 months looking at different attainable housing strategies. Frank, do you have comments?
I'm sorry. Are you asking me?
You're going to tell us the
I'm
status
having
of the
trouble
bill.
hearing.
Maybe.
Mr. Cassidy, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Mr. Mayor, now a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm having a terrible time hearing. I heard very little of what the vice mayor said. I apologize, but we did a dry run on this, and it seemed to work a little better on the dry run. But in any event, I appreciate the task force's work on this. There are some specific recommendations in the report for how, how we would take some of these ideas into the zoning code. And so I will be, of course, looking to the council for guidance on those. A couple of the items in the report kind of match some of the legislation that is in fact still being negotiated with Senator Kaiser and the League. Right now, the legislature is on a hiatus, if you will, on a delay. They're going to come back June the 12th. But a couple of the things that are probably going to be in the legislation, if we can read the tea leaves right, are ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units. And those are mentioned in the report, but not really clearly included in a recommendation. They're mentioned in the part about the comments by local developers. They recommend allowing ADUs, and I think the legislation is going to require them. So pending your feedback, I'd be inclined to try to incorporate some ADU information elements into the zoning code. And the second thing that the builders seem to really hit on a lot is higher density. And certainly that is mentioned in the recommendations, but in the recommendations of the task force, it seems like it's primarily higher density in the core areas where we've talked about having the overlay. So that'll be an element that we'll want to probably talk about. I know that the limitations of Zoom are going to make it very difficult to get this feedback here. So I'll work with, the staff to get feedback from you on some of these other elements. But I'll try to answer any questions if I can hear them. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Frank. And I'm glad you brought that up. When we were talking about density bonuses, we were actually talking about in the core area and in redevelop areas. So I'm glad you brought that up, because those areas that we were talking about and attainable housing really needs services. So they're going to have to be in the more populated areas that we have. We're not talking about in the outskirts of town or in the area that is open space. We're talking about in the areas of town that are already developed or need to be redeveloped. So I'm glad you brought that up. The other area that I wanted to point out is one of the recommendations is the lots that the town owns in the floodplain. So the town owns several lots within the floodplain in Prescott Valley. We own probably about 30 lots, and they're very small lots. And part of what we're doing as a town is we're working on a drainage study, and it's my hope that that drainage study will work on bringing some of those lots out of the floodplain, so then we would be able to work with some of our nonprofits, and I see some of them here in the room, to work with them to build some sort of attainable housing on those smaller lots. So that, I just wanted to clarify. It's not that we're gonna build houses in the floodplain. It would only be if we could get those houses that we already own out of the floodplain. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to call Allison Lennox up from Coalition from Compassion and Justice, and she was on our Attainable Housing Committee. Welcome, Allison. And while she's coming up, I really wanted to compliment you on Paloma Village and the the groundbreaking that we all just went to.
Oh,
So
thank you very much.
congratulations
Thank
on
you.
that.
We're really excited. Thank you for coming too.
And I said to your chairman, and I'll say it here, that I just want you to pick that project up and bring it to Prescott Valley, because it's an awesome project.
We're ready. We just need land. That's it.
And
No
then
big deal.
The next time our consultant Tia, who is also on in this meeting, comes up, I want to take her out and show her that project.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit, that some of us were there, but tell us a little bit about that project out there. It's in Chino Valley. Who it's geared to, what kind of, I know it's families because it's multiple bedrooms. Kind of describe the square footage, the income levels, and the rents if you can. Tell me a little bit about who's going to live there.
So we have 4 acres in Chino Valley that will be developing a 25-unit manufactured home park. So what that's going to look like is it's going to be there's going to be a park in the middle, a playground, a community gazebo, and we really want it to feel like a small town community. Yes, we will be. Our rents right now, I don't have the exact rents, but they're going to be anywhere between $800 and $1,200. We'll have 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom options. And when we started doing this project, we kind of started to look at who we are serving. Over the past year, we've seen that we have more families, double income folks that are both working, mom and dad are both working jobs, and they have kids, and they cannot afford to live here. So we decided that we were not only going to develop housing for individuals, couples, but also now we're geared towards families. They are on the smaller side. I think our largest one is right around 1,100, 1,200 feet. And the reason for that is because, and the beauty of this project is it can either be transitional or it can be permanent. We want this to be a stepping stone for folks who maybe just need a year. Other folks, maybe they're, downsizing, or they're on fixed incomes, so they don't need a huge space and don't want that. And so we really want to be able to help as many people as we possibly can with one project.
So you had, the one I looked at, I think, was like 650 square feet, 2-bedroom, but it had a living room and a kitchen and a beautiful outside. And then there was one, I think that was 3-bedroom and 1,000. So to me, that seems like a smaller home. So tell me a little bit about, seems like smaller homes are becoming more popular. I know my daughter lives in a smaller home and she's just fine with it. And it seems like the younger kids these days are into the smaller homes. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So I think that it's twofold. Again, incremental growth. You know, if you're going, and that's kind of what we're also talking about, that growth sometimes is too quick. So we believe in incremental growth, and that sets up the tenant for success. So if you are staying somewhere where you pay $200 a month, and then all of a sudden the next month you are expected to pay $2,000 a month, that's what we're talking about when we talk about incremental growth. Also, it could be a stepping stone. Again, that could be someplace where someone goes to get the help that they need, reestablish themselves, or the family to reestablish the family, and then they can move on to something else. We have seen in just some of the other housing models that we have that smaller is what people are preferring. A lot of our folks who are on fixed incomes, I know I've got 2 older gentlemen who live in our housing, and they're both on fixed incomes, and they love the fact that they don't have a giant house that they have to clean or a giant yard to clean up. So we are seeing that is more of a want. And if that's not, if the family outgrows that home, again, that was a stepping stone. You move on to something else.
So Allison, let's change gears here. You run a shelter in Prescott.
We do.
And one of our 36 items, after talking to our police chief, you and I met with him as part of this study, was to start looking at a homeless shelter or a shelter in Prescott Valley. And the chief was 100% behind that. And I don't want to speak for you, chief, because we have to take our officers off the street when we have to take
Correct.
somebody to Prescott. And tell me the part about now with the Prescott jail opening.
Yeah. So as of right now at CCJ, I always have a bed open for law enforcement. That means that if they come across someone who either needs a place to stay for that night, or is someplace that they're not supposed to be, instead of booking that person into jail, they can bring them to us and they'll have a safe and legal place to sleep for that night. That does 2 things. It lightens the officers' workload. That way they're not doing paperwork all night. They're able to get back into the cars. They're able to get back onto the streets and protect everybody. I think that once we see that the jail opens, a lot of times what ends up happening is if there's a domestic dispute, somebody can't go back to the house. So where do they go? Well, if you don't have a car or you don't have a friend's couch to sleep on, you're going to be going to the street. So I think that having a shelter not only gives folks who need shelter a place to be, but it also helps our law enforcement. That way they can get back to, answering calls and things of that nature. I know for us, we work really closely with the jail in Camp Verde. So if someone is not allowed to go home, they can come and they can stay with us. And then that way it also lessens that person from breaking a restraining order or going back someplace where they're not supposed to be and being rebooked.
So Allison, so let's talk a little bit about some of the individuals that are in your shelter, because you've told me that many of them, maybe most of them, have full-time jobs.
That's correct.
Okay.
So again, when I talk about the face of homelessness changing, when you think of homelessness, you're going to think of that stereotypical kind of movie character where it's the older gentleman drinking out of the brown paper bag or the lady pushing the shopping cart. That is not who that's not the people that are staying with me every night. 9 times out of 10, the majority of my shelter have full-time jobs. So I've got men and women that wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and they go to construction jobs. I have a woman who is a restaurant manager. Everyone it has income. So it's one of those moments where it's a little bit like, oh, wow, this isn't stereotyping that we're talking about. We get a lot of calls from men and women who have children and they work in the school system. They work at the college. They work for the city and the town, and they just can't afford to live. We also don't have a family shelter. So if you do have an intact family, the men would come to CCJ and the ladies and the children would go to Prescott Area Shelter Services. Again, we're talking, it's only 10 miles, but that 10 miles makes a big difference. So the face of homelessness is really changing, especially in Prescott Valley. We're seeing a lot of folks calling us going, hey, right now I'm living in my car and that works for me right now. But what happens when there's an accident and the car is totaled, or they're parked someplace they're not supposed to be and the car is towed? You now have an individual who has absolutely nowhere to go and no way to get to where services are. So when I suggested the shelter idea, I know that sometimes that's a little, we don't want a shelter. But I think that when you look at them side by side, having a safe and legal place for people to be when they don't have a place to go is not only dignified, but it also helps all of us. It is proven that there's studies that have been done that even if there's shelter, but especially with housing, you see taxpayer, it lessens the burden on taxpayers because we're not seeing as many emergency room visits. We're not seeing as many people who need to be taken to the hospital in ambulances. You're seeing less people getting arrested. And so housing is healthcare. And it's healthcare even if it's a shelter, because that's still housing of some sort. So we truly believe that, especially at CCJ, that once you house someone, that's the way to get healthy. And then you can kind of figure out everything else. You can figure out, oh, I haven't been to the doctor in 3 years. Let me go to the doctor. Or my kids haven't seen a doctor. So we really believe that housing is healthcare, even if it's a shelter that we're talking about.
Thank you, Ellison. I just want to thank you again for hosting that event, for your groundbreaking, because I made a really good contact in Linda Jensen from the Arizona Housing Coalition. And when she found out that we had 4 council members there from the town of Prescott Valley, even though it was in Chino Valley, and that we had just released an attainable housing report, and that we were supporting finding people homes, she said, wow, I have grants available if you're interested.
Oh, she already emailed all of her friends.
Okay.
Because I got like 2 or 3 emails after that. So thank you guys for attending. It was amazing. And we're so excited. And I know in my speech I said I was coming for you, Prescott Valley, and I mean it.
Yeah.
So let's keep the conversation going.
And then our friend Joan Service, who used to be the director of Arizona Housing Coalition, is now the director of Arizona Department of Housing, has also gotten our report too. So we're very excited about that. So thank you.
Yes, no, thank you.
I also have questions for Lindsay Wood. So I met Lindsay on Saturday at the Whistle Stop, which is a new RV park in town. And she is called the Tiny Home Lady. And she is, hi Lindsay.
Hello.
So she has modeled tiny homes out at the Whistle Stop, which is out in Dewey in Prescott Valley, kind of across from Lefty's Steakhouse.
Good location or originator, yes. And I'm here with Gail Kingsbury and Austin with United Tiny Homes, the builders of the tiny homes there at Whistle Stop, which is a partnership of Whistle Stop RV and Tiny Home Park and United Tiny Homes. So featuring not just an RV park where people can come and bring their RVs, but also have full-time annual living there in tiny homes.
Great. So I have a couple questions for you because I was very interested in that. First of all, what I saw there that day was the price of a tiny home was between $70,000 and $120,000 that somebody could purchase there.
We have up to 150 based on your trim package, yes.
150 based on your trim package. And so then a person or an agency, like if the hospital wanted to buy 3 or 4 of them for nurses, could buy them and rent a lot there for $1,000 a month for a year and just put the nurses in there when they come.
Absolutely.
And-
Given the numbers we saw earlier in the report, that would definitely reduce the impact of the housing since we are an open park with 250 spaces available.
Right. So, or a contractor could buy some tiny homes there and pay the rent, the $1,000 a month for utilities and put his contractors there when he's building something.
Yes, and then the nice part is they get to own a portion of that. You know, a lot of what we have in, you know, I feel like it's called right-sizing our American dream. The opportunity to really tap into home ownership is largely lost on many people when they're really just paying rent and, you know, someone else's American dream when a lot of people want to have a piece of it. So what we really figured out is somewhere between $1,500 to $2,000 that someone's paying in rent right now could be transferred over, and at least a quarter, if not half of that, would then go back into their own pocket. And that really taps into home ownership, even if they're still renting the space below them. The nice part is they're all on wheels, so they can take them. And part of what we're also working to do, one of the things mentioned here is looking at other, the task force that they just worked on is looking at other ordinances. So I come from California where at least 16 ordinances have been passed addressing accessory dwelling units and being able to allow them on wheels.
Great. So my question is, because then I've also, so I think of teachers, so the school district could buy one or two and, you know, but then I've also heard negative comments to say, oh, why would you want to put a teacher in a tiny little house like that? But then I think what Allison just said and what I've heard my daughter say is, we don't want a big house, Mom. So what are you seeing in terms of people who are looking to downsize? Because I watched that Tiny Home Nation show, and families of 4 are now going into tiny homes.
Yes, I think it's a priority. You know, I grew up, like many of us grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and it was all about bigger. But if we track back to 1940s and 50s, 1,000 square feet with family of 4 is something that some of us can remember either our parents or grandparents having. So it's not something new, it's just we got a little bit bigger size. And now we're going back to right-sizing it for some people. Some people that want to have bigger home for a bigger family, and then others that may have kids leaving the nest or their kids are actually at home and they want to have their kids to have independent life, but they don't necessarily need all that big space of a 2,500 square foot home. They've got to clean, heat, and cool.
Right. And so then what are you seeing tiny home playing a role in affordable housing in the area?
Pretty much what I just mentioned around the affordability or at least the home ownership. So if they're naturally in that rental mindset of paying somewhere between $1,500 to $2,000, which after doing a lot of research, that's about on par with what's going on here, to be able to own a portion of that, to then you can save some money to maybe buy that plot of land to put it. If ADU rules open up more here and then allow that on wheels, now you've got the opportunity to do multi-generational housing. We were just at the Yavapai Home and Garden Show. Hands down, 90% of the people were parents with kids or someone with land that wanted to put someone in the backyard. So they have that ability to have privacy from each other, but also that multi-generational family housing that I feel like we left behind in the 40s and 50s and did this big journey along the 70s, 80s, and 90s and big into the suburbia. So I think that multi-generational family housing, I feel like it's multifamily versus multi-generational, and that is a big request going on right now. And you don't need to build the sky rises of apartments. You can put people in the backyards of family plots of land that you can appreciate property values and all, you know, they're going to inherit it one day anyway.
Right. Well, thank you, Lindsay. Do you
Thank
have
you.
anything else to add for us?
I'm
You
just
read
really
the-
excited that all of you are talking about this. The task force is here and we're here to help you in whatever way, since we've actually brought a lot of people that actually do redevelopment in California. So the smaller plots that, you know, the cities own around here that you could really develop, we've got a lot of ideas for that.
And you're going to send me stuff that I can send to Frank?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Thank you.
And can people come and tour anytime? Do you have hours?
Yes, we do. We do. I can hand out my cards, but we're whistlestoprv.com.
Okay, great, great. And so I have a question for Sandy Griffiths. Sandy was also on our task force. So Sandy was helpful because we did a survey of the contractors. And one of the slides you notice, can we put that up, Fatima, the slide that said builders explanation for attainable housing shortage? Back a couple. There you go. Oh, that was it. So Sandy, thank you for the work you did with the builders. I think it was, just had it. Number 9. Thank you. Sandy, thank you for the work you did with the builders. I want them to know that that we're going to listen to them, that Frank is working on the zoning code. Have they had a chance to look at this, and what are they saying?
First of all, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Vice Mayor Hunt and Council for allowing this presentation to take place. And I will say that I'm quite honored to be in such high esteem as my other colleagues in the audience this evening. So thank you. Our report is 70-some pages of great ideas. And as you said, Vice Mayor Hunt, in that report, we interviewed and talked with many contractors on different levels of contracting, from the 50 to 100 employee GC to the single guy who builds duplexes and has no office help. They're quite excited that we are looking at changing some zoning codes and ordinances and land use plans. They see what's going on with the cost of housing. It's rising daily. It's still going up. So they're excited that we're looking at different avenues of housing, attainable, affordable, that they can build for all levels of income. And that includes our tiny homes, that includes boxables. So they want to look at value engineering to bring those prices down, where everyone can have the opportunity to own and live in a home. So that was a very eye-opening segment of that report.
Nice.
And they are excited. The accessory dwelling units, I can hardly wait to get that open and see our tiny homes in every backyard in Prescott Valley. Not quite, just kidding. And I want some of our audience to know that this report in no way will turn Prescott Valley into a mobile home, modular home, tiny home community. There will still be homes built for every level of income, and we will still have our 2,000, 3,000 square foot homes, because there are people that still need those. We're just being adaptable and, again, making home affordability available to everyone.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Hunt.
One more shout out, and then I'm going to wrap up. Frank Almendaris back there from the hospital, I want to thank you for your time that you spent with us on the committee. You answered a lot of questions. I will call you up if you have anything to say. I know, want to add anything? I know you, the hospital. Frank is with Dignity Health, and
she's older now, so there's a lot of screaming that goes on in our. I appreciate what Prescott Valley, the council members, the mayor, the vice mayor are doing in regards to housing. You know, our CEO, Dr. Tony Torres, is here with me as well, with some other groups from Dignity Health. We understand the crisis. I mean, it's just not here, it's everywhere. Every community is dealing with it. But we see the impact because we're healthcare. We want to bring professionals to this community. And when they're having difficulty in finding homes, they could afford it, but they're having difficulties in finding homes, either rentals or just buying. It does impact the community. It impacts the growth. And most people, when they come to a community, they're looking at fire, police safety, education, and healthcare. And so we're like one of those cogs that brings people to a community. So I appreciate the work that the task force has been doing for us. So thank you.
And thank you for your time. We tried to dispel Section 8 in the report. I just want to say that there is some Section 8 housing in this town. It's a very small amount. It's mostly for seniors. It's located in the Viewpoint Apartments, which are over back behind here off of Viewpoint. Very self-contained, very well-maintained. Section 8 is very hard to get from the federal government, that voucher. So that is not something that we're talking about here when we talk about attainable housing. We're talking about housing for our firefighters and our police officers, for those people that draw our blood at the hospital. We're talking about our nurses. We're talking about our teachers. We're talking about our contractors, our landscapers. So please bear with us. I think the accessory dwelling unit is a good idea. I think we need to embrace that, especially since the state is going to make that a requirement. I do hope that they don't take away our right to review projects and our right to hear residents when they want to comment on projects. I do want to say that as a result of this report, our fine town manager has created a whole new department called the Neighborhood Services Department. And we have a director in Fernando Gonzalez. Sir, thank you for that. And that housing is now going to be under you. And we've hired Miss T. Van Hook, and I'm very excited about that, as a consultant to help us start implementing those 36 items, and she has a wealth of experience. And so I guess I'm asking next steps, Gilbert. There may be some resolutions coming to us with regard as T starts implementing, and I know Frank we'll probably start seeing some information from him coming back with regard to the zoning ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council. So yes, we'll have a number of parallel tracks of activity taking place. So as we begin to set up the new neighborhood services division and formulate that team, and T. Van Hook, who is online with us, will be working closely with that team as we begin to go through the recommendations. The report highlights short-term, mid-term, and longer-term items. So there are some low-hanging fruit, if you will, things that we can begin to immediately work on. There will be other things that we'll have to strategize on for, outlier years. So we will be working along all of those fronts. Parallel to that, Mr. Cassidy has been working with our development services team on redoing the town's land development code, and then certainly tracking all of the proposed legislation at the state level that will have direct impacts on our land development code. So we will be coming back to council with a full update into the P&Z on that, and then eventually getting those adopted and fully implemented. So there's a lot of activity that's going to be taking place over the next number of months into the next year.
Council, we have anything else? Again, I just want to thank everyone. And for the full report, you can go to our website and check that out. There is a ton of information. We really just glazed over the surface of it today. But there's a lot of information about workforce and projections into the future. So please take an opportunity to at least read that. And with that being said, folks, thanks for coming. And you are more than welcome to stick around. We'll start back up in about another half hour.
Thank you.